What is going on, you diehards and degenerates? How's everybody doing? This is the total takedown for UFC Vegas 68. We are talking overs and unders. If you missed the full-on Monday breakdown, we took every single fight on this card, analyzed it from top to bottom, gave you our best looks as far as bets and picks and things like that goes. Today, we're focusing on the totals. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe here to Pub Sports Radio, and become a member if you haven't already. The lines, as always, are brought to you by Superbook Sports. First fight of the night, Tatsuro Tiara taking on Jesus Santos Aguilar, and we've got a 1.5 here. The over 1.5 is minus 130. The under 1.5 is plus 110. So Tatsuro is the biggest favorite on the card, minus 1,200 at this point. But they are saying that this is an over 1.5, so that he's not just going to run through Jesus Aguilar, according to the bookies. I get it. You know, Aguilar can kind of throw himself off balance. He comes in winging big, wild shots, throws himself off balance, and ends up in ground scrambles. You gotta think he knows what he's up against in this spot, and maybe he comes in a little bit more restrained, doesn't quite go as crazy, and if he has a little bit more restraint himself, then maybe we don't get as many scrambles. Maybe Tatsuro struggles to get him to the ground just a little bit more. At the end of the day, I think Tatsuro subs him, and I think it happens relatively quickly. Even if this thing plays out on the feet, that's where I do think maybe it potentially goes over if Tatsuro decides to have kind of a kickboxing match with a guy to show that he's well-rounded and show that he's got a different set of skills. This thing could squeeze its way over that 1.5, but I think as soon as it hits the ground, Tatsuro's ground advantage is so much larger than his opponent's that's going to spell the end. It's a matter of does it come early or late. I don't like the 1.5. I would have to lean with the under, but at the same time, we are talking lower weight classes. These are not heavyweights. And so this very well could be a scrambly fight where Jesus has focused very much on his submission defense and it stretches the fight out a little bit longer. I don't hate it if you want to make a case for the over and say that the sub doesn't come until round 2 or round 3. Maybe Tatsuro gets his first decision win in the UFC. So I'm not touching this one. Second fight on the card, we've got Dennis Tululian taking on Jun-yong Park. Total set at 2.5 for this bad boy. And I kind of like violence. The under 2.5, it's minus 110, so it's a pick 'em, even money. Could go either way. If Jun-yong Park comes out with a grappling heavy game plan, I think that lends itself to this thing going towards the over and hitting the judges' scorecards. But if it's a striking match, now Park has some good boxing. He's decently technical, decently defensive, but Dennis really forces a firefight. So because of that, I think one of these guys is going to get cracked with something big, and it will force the action and probably an under at that stage. And even if Jung-yong Park does really get the grappling going, I think a ground and pound or a submission is something that could open itself up a little bit later in the fight. I don't think it goes all 15 one way or the other, so under 2.5 is where I'd be looking for that fight. Mandy Bohm taking on Ji-yeon Kim. The over is minus 360 to the 2.5. This is your classic women's MMA over spot. The under 2.5 is plus 300. The only situation here in this fight is that Mandy Bohm, first off, on the feet is really hittable. We've seen her get cracked by pretty much every opponent she's been in the UFC cage with, and Kim hits far harder than anybody that she's shared the cage with so far. Mandy Bohm also really has a really nasty body kick on her. We saw that work against Victoria Leonardo in her last fight, and she had Victoria in some pain more than once over the course of that fight, and she's got a grappling advantage here in this spot. If she wants to take Kim down, Kim's got some of the worst takedown defense in this division. So I think there are actually options for both of these women to find their way to a finish. With the way Mandy Bohm slows down and gasses out, Kim might be able to take advantage of that and crack her. With the way Kim can get taken down, there's an opportunity for a ground and pound or even a submission victory. You maybe plug your nose and take a shot at that plus 300 on the under 2.5 here in that spot. This is the kind of fight where you can pull that off and get paid handsomely for it. Next up, you've got Hyun-sung Park taking on Seung-guk Choi. Total set at 2.5. The over is minus 215 to the over 2.5. The under 2.5 is plus 190. Folks, these fights, relative unknowns here coming to the UFC. There are a lot of these fighters that are making their UFC debuts, and we just don't know enough about them to really say how they're going to affect these spots. Some of these fights are going to go under unexpectedly. Some of them are going to go over unexpectedly. Tread lightly in these spots. I do think this fight stands a decent chance of going the full 15 minutes. The thing is, Seung-guk Choi, I think, is being maybe a little bit overlooked in this spot. Personally, I do lean towards Lee. Both these guys do have decent grappling on them. And I think we could have this. Wait a second. I thought Lee was fighting somebody else. Am I mixed? See, the problem with these names is I've got Jung-yong Lee on the mind, and I'm talking I'm talking about Hyun-sung Park, which is why I'm messing up this breakdown. So I do apologize. We got to hit the reset button. I do agree with the over 2.5. I don't think I want to lay the minus 215 on it. I'm not going to be betting much of these fights because, like I said, very unknown fighters. So be careful, tread lightly. I'll say over. No confidence in that. We do have Rinya Nakamura taking on Toshiomi Kazama in the next fight. Total set at 1.5. The over is minus 125. The under is plus 105. And I think I like violence. The 1.5s always make me nervous. I prefer 2.5s personally. That extra round makes me feel a whole lot better about my violence bets. I do think that this fight can end early, but at the same time, Kazama is a solid grappler. Even if he ends up on bottom, he's very wiggly, very scrambly. Just because it hits the floor once doesn't mean it's over with this kid. Rinya is a much better wrestler than his opponent. If this fight takes place striking, I do think Rinya probably knocks him out on the feet, but it's a matter of how much grappling is involved, because if it hits the floor, Rinya probably has control position time, and that'll extend this fight, and it could get over that 1.5. So very, very dangerous fight. I'm picking Rinya Nakamura to win this one probably relatively easily, but the 1.5 scares me. I will say under. I'll say under at plus 105, but again, it's not one that I'm going to be betting. Jun-yong Lee taking on Yi-za. The total again set at 1.5 for this one. The under 1.5 looks like it's plus 105. The over 1.5 is minus 135. And this is a very similar spot. Yazi has got the grappling advantage, the pure grappling advantage. His opponent, Jung-yong Lee, probably has the wrestling advantage. Striking, relatively similar, but Yi has a big edge in experience. This is going to be a good fight. And this is one where I could see it being a very scrambly grappling match that neither guy is able to really take advantage of their opponents. They're both defensively solid enough for it to get extended. I will say over 1.5 at minus 135. I don't think anybody gets punched out early or easily in this spot, but either one of them could get caught in some kind of a submission really at any point in this fight. Complete stay away from me. That's not a total I have any interest in touching. Next up, you've got Anshul Jubli taking on Jeka Saragih. Dang it, I was doing really well with these names until I got to Jeka's last name. Total set at 2.5. Over is even money, plus 100. Under 2.5, minus 120 for this spot. I again do kind of lean towards the violence here. Jeka's a finisher. Jeka's got some nasty finishing ability. He carries it late, so he's always got that, comeback card if he needs to pull that out, if he's behind a round or two, something like that. Anshul Jubli is big, super big, and because of that, he slows down. So I do think he's got that bully mentality. He can finish people early. He can work them over early, but the later the fight goes, the more it opens up the door for Jeka to take advantage of a slowing down, gassing opponent. Watch the weigh-ins closely on this one, folks. This is one where I really want to see what Jubli looks like on the scales. He doesn't have necessarily like a history of missing weight or anything like that, but again, his size, he's such a big guy for the weight class. I got to think that's not an easy weight cut for him, and I think eventually that could catch up with him. So I'm going to say violence. I'll say under 2.5, minus 120. Don't care who gets it done. Just somebody go out there and get me a finish. Adam Fugitt taking on Yusaku Kinoshita. Total set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is plus 120. The under 2.5 minus 140. And I completely agree with the violence bet here. The way Adam Fugitt fights, he could win a decision. That's the one thing that kind of worries me. If Adam Fugitt stays all in or all out, if he's able to get the takedowns, if he's able to use that 6-inch reach advantage and control the space, he could work his way to a decision. But his opponent, 22-year-old Kinoshita, he either takes people's heads off, knocks them out quickly, or we could see him really get exposed by a veteran here in this spot. And if that happens, it could very well likely be a finish because Adam Fugitt's a finisher. So it's another tough one here for me. I'm going to lean with the under 2.5, either a knockout or a sub here, minus 140. But I also wouldn't be shocked if this thing managed to squeeze its way over because Adam Fugitt sticks to the jab. So I'm probably going to tread lightly on this one. I may not even bet this total. It's a very, very interesting fight. A big test spot for Kinoshita coming in here in the Dana White Contender Series fade position. Kyle Nelson taking on Duho Choi. Total set at 1.5. The over 1.5 is minus 130. The under 1.5 is plus 110. Now, the under makes a ton of sense here because Kyle Nelson always knocks his man out in the first round. If he doesn't get that first round knockout, he's usually the one that's on the outside of a beating. Duho Choi has talked about this fight, the change in mentality, letting the knockout come to him. He thinks it's going to be there. He's just got to wait for his moment. He's rushed a couple of his fights before, and that's what's put him in those bad spots. That's what's got him hurt. That's what's got him knocked out. I think he learned that lesson. And I think we all know that Kyle Nelson is a guy that you can bake. You can stick him in the oven and wait 5 minutes, and then he's just prime and ripe after he gets out of that first round. So because of those things, I think the over 1.5 makes some sense. I think Duho Choi probably knocks Kyle Nelson out in the second or the third round after weathering the initial storm and being the guy that's more technical with better cardio the deeper this thing goes. But also don't be surprised if either Kyle Nelson nukes Choi in the first because he is prone to do that every once in a while, or if Choi just finds the perfect shot. This kid's got flying knees on him and he's got that nasty rear uppercut. Those can take place at any point in time in this fight. I'm picking Duho Choi. I'm picking the knockout. It's just a matter of when it takes place. And if he follows the game plan, it's probably a little bit later. So I'll say over 1.5. Definitely not a total I've got any interest in betting. Blagoy Ivanov taking on Marcin Tybura. We've got a 2.5 here. The over is minus 205. The under is plus 180. And it does seem like a slam dunk over spot because both these guys are so durable. Neither of them are crazy finishers. Neither of them have terrible takedown defense. They both have actually a very solid takedown defense and good cardio to go with it. So we're probably going to see a sloppy heavyweight banger here in this spot. The only thing is, we have actually seen Blagoy knock some big names down. I mean, when he fought Tai Tuivasa, he clocked Tai. And now I know Tai kind of forces a gunfight, so that's not necessarily the kind of thing you can hang your hat on. But even in Blagoy's last fight, he had his man hurt deep in that fight as well. Don't sleep on the power of Blagoy Ivanov. We have seen Marcin Tybura knocked out by power punchers before. In fact, when he was about to get cut by the UFC and everybody counted him out thinking he was a bum, it was because he had 3 out of 4 fights where he was knocked out relatively quickly. We could see Blagoy step in here and do something similarly. In fact, I took a sprinkle on the knockout because it was plus 600 for Blagoy to go ahead and get that done. So I think the over makes sense from a picking perspective, but I don't mind a little value stab on that finish there. Plus 180 for the under 2.5 is not enough to get me excited. Plus 600, now we're talking. So I'll say over 2.5 at the minus 205, but I absolutely have that degenerate sprinkle on the knockout prop. Da-un Jung taken on Devin Brown Bear Clark. We've got a 2.5 here. The under 2.5 minus 160. The over 2.5 is plus 140. And folks, I completely agree with this. I think Devin Clark is a poor man fighter. Unfortunately, I think he's being put in a showcase spot, much like Kyle Nelson. Da-un Jung should get this win here, and he should be able to do almost whatever he wants with Devin Clark. Devin Clark doesn't respond to punches the way that he used to. That willingness to grind and dig deep and survive big power shots, it just isn't there. It hasn't been there his last couple of fights. I think he's kind of taken a little bit too much damage, unfortunately. And Da-un Jung is much, much bigger than he is and hits a whole lot harder than he does. As long as Da-un Jung isn't like Alonzo Minifield and doesn't gas out, 3 minutes into the first grappling exchange, he should be able to pick his shots and get Devin Clark out of there pretty much whenever he feels like. So I will say under 2.5 at minus 160 is the pick. If Devin Clark comes in rejuvenized, revitalized, and is able to get the grappling going, really his path to victory has always been a decision. So that's where if you're on Devin Clark, the over 2.5 makes some sense. But I think Da-un Jung finishes that one. Sergey Spivak taking on Derrick the Black Beast Lewis. 1.5 here for your main event, unfortunately. The under 1.5 minus 125. The over 1.5 is plus 105. And we've done this a million times, folks. Heavyweight slobber knockers. The over 1.5 at plus money just prints. It just does so well. Everyone expects these boys to come in here and bang it out, and especially with Derrick Lewis's last couple of fights, he's just gone to war with some of the biggest power punchers in the game, and these fights are over in a minute, 30 seconds, that kind of thing. So because of that, we get these numbers, and then you get him up against a grappler. Well, Sergey Spivak can't rush in on Derrick Lewis. We've seen what happens when that happens. So I think Spivak's smart enough not to let that take place. Derrick Lewis, supposedly taking this fight very seriously. I have questions. I think, the sickness is what slimmed him down, not the cardio. But, even if he is taking this a little bit more seriously, he's probably not bum rushing anything. So this fight probably takes a little bit more breathing room than people are expecting it to. And if that's the case, this thing could slide right over that 1.5. Now, again, we're dealing with heavyweights. If Sergey Spivak gets the back of Derrick Lewis, if Derrick Lewis isn't 100% after being sick, this one could be over quick. If Derrick Lewis is 100% after being sick, we've seen Sergey Spivak get clocked and knocked out in the first round by a power puncher more than once. So a round one finish is not out of the question whatsoever in this particular fight. But I kind of think Sergey Spivak, if he's going to win this, takes Derrick Lewis down on repeat and chips away at the gas tank, maybe gets him out of there in the second or the third round, maybe TKO, maybe he does like Daniel Cormier did, takes his back and gets a rear naked choke. And Derrick Lewis is always live for that third round knockout. He can weather the storm, wait for his opponent to slow down, and then pick his big shot and get him out of there. But you're always gambling if you're betting against the power of Derrick Lewis on an over. So I'm going to tie my bootstraps up and I'll say over 1.5 for the main event. I'm not betting that, folks. Just let you know right now I am not betting that, but I will call the over 1.5 as the move for the main event at UFC Vegas 68. That's the total takedown. We'll see you guys tomorrow for the undefeated post weigh-in show. Good luck on all your degenerate action, and let's roll.